everyone, it's Katrina. Number 10. Sweden's Island of Witches. The island of Blåjungfrun in Sweden, which in English means Blue Maiden, is one of the nation's most beautiful national parks. But there's a dark and sinister side to the island that makes it a place of evil as well. In Swedish folklore, Blue Maiden Island is home to witches, magic, and horrors. And just recently, archaeological discoveries have revealed a possible explanation as to why the small Swedish island has been seen as a thing of evil for so long. The island is located in the Baltic Sea, just off the coast of southern Sweden. It's made of blue granite and it's shaped like the back of a turtle. It's also only 1 kilometer long, which is relatively small. But despite being so tiny, the island is covered in oak and maple trees and has a thriving bird population. But who cares about birds when there are witches to talk about? As far back as anyone can remember, the island was associated with storms. Its name changed from Blåkulla to Blåjungfrun because rumor was that if you said the island's name, it would immediately produce a storm and destroy your boat. In the 16th century, witches supposedly gathered on the island on the day before Good Friday. But you may be wondering, what did the witches do at their annual hag meeting? Well, they consorted with the devil, of course. There is another legend that speaks of supernatural beings living on the island. These creatures were female in nature, but beings of great evil. People used to leave sacrificial offerings on the shores of the island to appease the beings, and apparently this would prevent them from wreaking havoc on the people who lived on the mainland. Then there's the labyrinth. The strange maze of stone has been on the island for a very long time, but nobody knows exactly how long. It isn't a stone-walled labyrinth with dark and twisting passages. It's a maze made of pebbles and small rocks laid out in spirals and long twisting corridors on the flat ground. And according to the locals, anyone who takes a rock from the labyrinth will be cursed for all of eternity, so don't even think about it. It was only recently that archaeologists discovered evidence of ritual activities carried out in 2 caves on Blue Maiden Island. The caves appear to date back to prehistoric times, thousands of years ago. The experts don't have any exact dates for when the rituals were conducted in the caves, but they did find a prehistoric altar, suggesting magical ceremonies. These ceremonies held in ancient times may have been the inspiration for the 16th century tales of witches. What do you think? Is this island actually evil? Let me know yours in the comments. And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. I want to give a big thank you to Meg Pint Molly for the generous super thanks. It really helps a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Number 9. The Correfoc Festival. There is an island in Spain called Mallorca, and it has a lot of history stretching back to before the days of Christianity. It also has beautiful beaches. On one night every year in Mallorca, Christian traditions and mystical ceremonies merge in the Festival of San Juan. It still happens annually, but its origin goes back centuries. The Festival of San Juan is named after John the Baptist. It's held every year on the summer solstice between June 20th and June 24th, on whichever night is the shortest. The whole point of the festival is that it symbolizes the triumph of light and the sun over darkness and evil. The Festival of San Juan is celebrated throughout all of Spain, not just on the island of Mallorca. Depending on which region you're in, you'll see different kinds of celebrations. In Menorca, people ride black horses through the streets, and in Alicante, people bring furniture outside and make bonfires. There's always some kind of weird local tradition that goes back to the days of paganism, and they almost always involve fire and the sun. On the island of Mallorca, they do something very special. If you're wondering what the deal with fire is, the festival is rooted in the idea of flame. People used to think that San Juan's fires would burn away the bad spirits of the dark and cure those who were afflicted with disease. Fire was also a way to cleanse the soul after the darkness of the previous year. It's said that you can jump over a bonfire 3 times on festival night to have your problems burned away. In ancient times, long before San Juan, pagans believed the shortest night of the year was when the gods were closest to humans. To them, the summer solstice was a time of magic and heightened superstition. So they too too lit fires to singe the bad spirits and keep away the forces of evil as they pushed against the fabric of the physical realm. What makes the island of Mallorca so special is something called Correfoc, or Night of Fire. Correfoc involves people dressed as horrifying demons that brandish torches and march through the streets. They also play drums and set off fireworks during this sacred tradition. It's a sort of dance with demons that goes back over 1,000 years. Number 8. The Elysian Fields. Many scientists agree that the ancient Greeks had contact with the Polynesians. They likely knew about each other over 3,000 years ago. In 1595, a group of Europeans exploring the Marquesas Islands described a civilization full of strong, blonde, white-skinned indigenous people. The Europeans were surprised to find folk who looked just like them on remote Polynesian islands. Then, in 1768, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, a French navigator who stumbled upon Tahiti, wrote something similar. He claimed that there were men over 6 feet tall that looked identical to Europeans. Many people believe the European-looking people of the islands are proof that ancient Greeks settled in Polynesia prior to Homer's work The Odyssey in the 8th century BC. Greeks likely settled on the island and then mixed with the locals. Even some of the most famous stories from Greek mythology are similar to the Polynesian myths. For example, let's take a look at the story of Orpheus. He traveled into the depths of the underworld to rescue his dead wife. And there is a very similar story in the Polynesian myth of Kura. In the story of Kura, she dies and then her husband tries to bring her back from the afterlife. In Homer's poems, he described the Elysian Fields as a paradise where all those who were favored by the gods enjoyed happiness for all of eternity. Homer wrote that the men who lived in Elysium had an easier life than anyone else. It was a place with no rain, no hail, and no snow. Homer also wrote that Elysium was an island surrounded by endless water, and the seas gave life to the men there. This sounds an awful lot like a Polynesian island, maybe even somewhere like Hawaii. Could it be that Homer's idea of heaven was based on the tropical islands of Polynesia? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Number 7. Holy Island. Lindisfarne, also known as Holy Island, is deeply connected to the Christian history of Britain. In the year 635 AD, King Oswald of Northumbria ordered an Irish monk named Aidan to be the bishop of the kingdom. Aidan came from a small monastery on an island situated off the coast of Scotland. And as the religious leader of 7th century Northumbria, Aidan was given a significant amount of power. The king even granted him the island of Lindisfarne to build a newer and bigger monastery. This was a turbulent time in the United Kingdom, mostly because it wasn't exactly united yet. The collapse of Roman authority led to the rise of small warring kingdoms. There were the Anglo-Saxon warlords and the Northumbrian kingdom, among others. One of the main things Oswald wanted to do was secure Great Britain using religion, and by establishing an order of bishops and monks and building monasteries, he could have better control. The monastery on Holy Island was a big success, and it became an even bigger success in the 670s when a monk named Cuthbert showed up. He was made bishop in 685 AD and became a famous healer. He's currently a saint and the most beloved of all the saints in England. After his death on March 20th, 687, he was buried in a stone coffin on Holy Island. And 11 years later, when his tomb was opened by the monks, they found his body had yet to rot. He seemed to be incorruptible, which led to him being made a saint. Holy Island continued to grow in popularity until it became the center of Christian learning throughout the British Isles. Unfortunately for the monks, though, Holy Island was raided by Vikings in 793, resulting in the devastation of the order, but the monastery was eventually restored. It became a stronghold in the 12th century as Scottish kings fought against King Edward I's invasion of the north. Holy Island went from being a peaceful place to a war zone, and as the years went on, it became more and more of a ruin. By the 18th century, there was little left except crumbling stone walls, but excavations that took place in the 19th and 20th centuries revealed the true scope of Holy Island's lost monastery. Number 6. Secrets of Clipperton Island. Clipperton Island is a bizarre place that's located about 670 miles from the coast of Mexico. It's not a tropical island paradise, but more of an island nightmare. It's barren, remote, and inhospitable. The island is also populated by poisonous crabs, and it rains most of the time and stinks of ammonia. So, in short, it's not a fun place to be. But regardless, Clipperton Island has a long and interesting history. Nobody knows for sure who originally found Clipperton Island, but it may have been Ferdinand Magellan in 1521. Others, however, think it may have been Spanish Captain Álvaro de Saavedra Cerón in 1526. So, it's kind of ironic that the island gets its name from John Clipperton, an English privateer from the 18th century. John was a pirate working for the British Crown and had nothing to do with the remote island's discovery, but he did use the inhospitable rock as a base for his raids around the year 1705. John was fighting the Spanish expansion into Central America, and legend has it that he set up a base on Clipperton, from which he attacked Spanish forces trying to establish colonies in Guatemala and Mexico. But the big deal with Clipperton Island came after the discovery of guano in 1804. German geographer Alexander von Humboldt learned how to use guano as fertilizer while in Peru. And when Europeans realized that Clipperton Island was full of guano deposits, it became hotly contested. People in Mexico, France, and the US all wanted the guano on the island for themselves. Then, in 1856, the US passed the Guano Islands Act. This made it totally legal for any American explorer to claim islands covered in guano for the United States. French Emperor Napoleon III sent Navy troops to annex the island in 1858, but that didn't last very long. Americans then showed up in 1892 to extract the guano deposits, and in 1897, Mexico also sent a gunship to annex the island. It wasn't until 1899 that the British claimed it for themselves. And since they had more boats and bigger guns, they were the winners in the end. These days, the island is technically in French territory, but has no status within the European Union. Number 5. Mysterious life forms. Scientists have discovered new and mysterious forms of life living in Hawaiian caves. The caves receive almost no sunlight and were formed fairly recently, between 65 and 800 years ago. Scientists say they could contain toxic minerals and poisonous gases. But even in such a harsh environment, in the cold, alien conditions of Hawaii's lava caves, life thrives. Samples taken between 2017 and 2019 showed far more unique life forms than scientists expected. Researchers sequenced 70 samples to determine microbial diversity inside the geothermal caves. But they weren't able to make any certain matches to no species or genre of microbes. What this means is that the caves and tunnels are full of poorly understood ecosystems. And amazingly, these ecosystems are incredibly diverse. Microbes make up a huge portion of the biomass on our planet. Microbes also make up almost all the biomass inside the planet, underneath the surface. These organisms are extremely small and can live in environments where most things would die. But because they are small, scientists have typically ignored them. Things you have to look at under a microscope aren't as interesting as large animals that you can touch. But scientists are being a little more diligent now since microbes exist in environments similar to Mars. So there is a possibility that these things live all throughout the universe on various planets. The recent study from Hawaii shows how little scientists understand about microbes. But the one thing scientists did notice was that older lava tubes have more microbes. They think it must take time for microbes to colonize volcanic caverns and structure a thriving community. Now, some scientists are wondering if extreme conditions help create a more stable microbial community. It might seem a little boring to some, but these tiny life forms are what allow the world to exist. Many centuries in the future, microbes could even be the key to making places like Mars habitable. In your opinion, how likely is it that we'll be colonizing Mars in the next 100 years? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Number 4. Roman coins and Germanic tribes. Archaeologists from Södertörn University have been hard at work conducting excavations on Svealand, a small island in central Sweden. During Roman times, 2,000 years ago, the island was inhabited by a Germanic tribe, and back then there was very little contact with the Romans. However, there was at least some contact. Recent archaeological discoveries have shown there was a trading network. Even the supposed barbaric tribes of the north had access to Roman coins and all the latest Roman fashions. The team of archaeologists found silver denarii from the 2nd century AD. One Roman coin has the image of Emperor Trajan on it, while the other has the face of Emperor Antoninus Pius. Both men were rulers of Rome in the early empire, and researcher Johan Ronby says the coins raise several important questions. It's true that the Romans sailed all the way to Scotland, but there are no records of them voyaging deep into the Baltic Sea. They knew the region was there, and they documented most of the area, but nobody ever wrote about visiting Svealand Island. This fact has left the team a little stumped because they aren't sure exactly how the coins reached the island. One theory is that the barbarian tribes were already trading with Rome, or at the very least, they were trading with people who were trading with Rome. They may have gotten the coins through a third party, and other Roman goods too. The coins may have even come from a shipwreck in the Baltic Sea. Researchers don't know for sure, but they feel like maybe the ancient world was more connected than most people think. Number 3. The Ichthyosaur. Paleontologists have discovered the fossilized remains of a massive monster on a remote Arctic island. The island is called Spitsbergen, located in northern Norway, and the fossilized creature is an ichthyosaur, one of the coolest extinct marine reptiles that ever lived. Ichthyosaurs appeared in the world's oceans about 250 million years ago. They almost lasted throughout the entirety of the dinosaur age, and they only started to go extinct in the late Cretaceous, about 90 million years ago. Some scientists have suggested that in the early Triassic, ichthyosaurs evolved from an unknown group of land reptiles. For some weird reason, the reptiles slipped into the ocean and became some of the earliest amphibian monstrosities, and that's why they had fish bodies but reptile characteristics. It's a pretty rare thing to find a full ichthyosaur skeleton on an icy island. It was collected during an expedition found stuck in a thick concretion. Limy sediment clung to the decomposing animal millions of years ago, but the biggest shock came when scientists dated the fossils and found them to be older than any other ichthyosaur. This creature appears to be one of the earliest forms of the animal and evolved 2 million years after the Permian mass extinction event. And now scientists think there could even be older ichthyosaur fossils hidden underneath glaciers and ice sheets in the Arctic. Number 2. Mysterious Greek Temple. At a hilltop sanctuary on the island of Kythnos, archaeologists discovered offerings from an ancient cult. Kythnos is located in Greece's Aegean Sea and has been occupied by humans for thousands of years. The hilltop sanctuary was found littered with scattered pieces of pottery left over many hundreds of years, and according to the Greek Culture Ministry, the experts found over 2,000 clay figurines. The clay figurines were in various states, with many of them shattered beyond repair. The tiny statues were mostly carved in the likeness of women and children, but a few of them were made to be men. There were also some animal figurines, primarily lions, pigs, birds, and tortoises. But what were all these weird clay figurines doing smashed around an ancient hilltop sanctuary? To answer that question, scientists had to figure out who the sanctuary was dedicated to. They think it was likely used to worship Demeter, the Greek goddess of agriculture and the deity responsible for keeping the earth green. She was also known as the goddess of spring and of rebirth. Demeter's daughter was Persephone, the wife of Hades, lord of the underworld. In Greek mythology, Hades fell in love with Persephone and kidnapped her, taking her back to his awful home in the hellish realm of the underworld. He then forced her to be his wife, and Demeter was devastated. She was so upset about losing her daughter that she stopped caring for the plants of the world. But eventually, Demeter and Hades came to an agreement. Persephone would be his wife for half the year and go back back with her mother the other half. Demeter agreed, but refused to take care of the earth while her daughter was away. And this is the myth that explains how winter was born. The sanctuary complex found on the island of Ichthyosaur was the place locals went to give praise to the goddess of the earth. And nearby was the seaside town of Rio Castro, the island's capital. It was inhabited non-stop from the 12th century BC until the 7th century AD, and it was only abandoned when pirates started raiding the island and the people needed a better place to hide. The sanctuary was used for roughly 1,000 years, so it's amazing that some of the clay offerings are still intact after so much time. Number 1. A vanishing island. An island has been completely wiped out by a hurricane. In the Pacific Ocean, following the fury of Hurricane Mallorca in 2018, East Island vanished. Scientists with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration were shocked when they looked at satellite images of the area after the storm and didn't see the island. It had been rising out of the ground right before the hurricane, but the storm was so powerful that as it ran across the island, it ripped it apart. East Island wasn't particularly large and was more of a reef than anything, part of the French frigate shoals. It was over 550 miles from Honolulu and was described by scientists as loose sand and gravel. The waves created by the hurricane were so strong that as they smashed against the island's unstable surface, the whole thing eroded. It was like putting nature on fast forward. The sand and gravel were blown away to settle across the sea floor, and as a result, the 11-acre island, with its highest point reaching 6 feet above sea level, was destroyed. The island even had a bit of history. It was used by the military during World War II, but most recently, biologists lived on the island in canvas tents while they studied local animals, like monk seals and green sea turtles. The island's shores will be sorely missed by the animals that once called it home, because all those creatures used East Island to birth their young. Chip Fletcher from the University of Hawaii said the real tragedy is that East Island was one of the very few sandy islands used by monk seals to give birth to their babies. There are only an estimated 1,400 Hawaiian monk seals left, and they need all the peaceful sand they can get. And unfortunately, the storm also blew away several hundred turtle nests that were buried in the sand. Thanks for watching! Which of these amazing islands would you love to live on for a week? Excluding the island that no longer exists, of course. Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to subscribe and give it a thumbs up for more. See you next time!